Hello, thank you for tuning in. Today I'm going to be going down a deep rabbit hole with you. It's a subject I haven't spoken on, or a subtopic I haven't spoken on yet, but I'm being urged to do so. So in this video I'm going to be showing you more direct ties, more overt ties my close family has with the Illuminati. And specifically, I'm going to be showing you that my paternal uncle, Paul Caruso, was Jimi Hendrix's handler. If you're not yet aware or educated on it, Jimi Hendrix was a MK Ultra slave and was assassinated when he broke out of his programming. Now, I'm going to be covering all of that with you, so if you have doubts, well, good, go do your research. But I'm also going to be showing some information with you to illustrate him being a multigenerational MK Ultra slave and having been assassinated by the Illuminati. And as well, I'm going to be showing you that Paul Caruso was one of his handlers, and that it is the Paul Caruso that is my uncle, who I was acquainted with. So my uncle has also passed in 2013. All right, so first off, I'm going to let you know why I was being urged to look into this and then share this information. This wasn't on my radar at all until the spirits of Paul came to me a little over a month ago. I think it was like 6 weeks ago, and brought my attention to the subject. So my mind wasn't on this at all. So if you don't know, I'm a natural born psychic and have a good conscious connection with my psychic abilities and with the metaphysical realm. And if you try to compartmentalize the truth of our 3D world, you know, the deep state, all of that, and compartmentalize spiritual truth, you will never know. You will never have full truth of either side. So they go hand in hand. Truth is truth. You need the whole truth to understand each component. So spiritual truth is very much required. Spiritual awareness is very much required to be educated and informed on what's happening on the ground level with the deep states, the Illuminati, etc. So I'm going to show you even a little bit of supporting evidence that Paul had come to me in spirit and started to communicate with me about this story. And I don't know yet the full reason for why it's important for me to communicate this now, like at this point in time. One thing that this is going to help with like my whole testimony, you know, connecting the dots, showing that my family is Illuminati. We are bloodline. So that's more supporting information of my testimony of MK Ultra, which involves, and the deep state, which involves so many people, corporations, so like, you know, the corrupt global asylum system, the corrupt national referral mechanism in Europe, which is supposed to be this structure to stop human trafficking and support its victims. And like I said, that's fraudulent. They're both means of human trafficking and satanic ritual abuse, MK Ultra reprogramming, and New World Order operation. And then there's the New Age cults, particularly Teal Swan's New Age cults, which I was subjected to, but endless other New Age cults, which are present in the small town of Totnes, England, that I'm in, and lots of other really intense MK Ultra programming and satanic ritual abuse in Totnes, a little place that nobody would suspect. And that's how it usually goes. There's usually a very clever cover for these things. Just like you wouldn't automatically suspect safe houses within the national referral mechanism to be prison camps and reprogramming centers for MK Ultra slaves. So, you know, being able to demonstrate really clear, direct ties that my close family has with the Illuminati is going to, you know, just help support all of my testimony. Before we go any further, just want to apologize that I'm wearing these crooked glasses. They're broken. You know, that's all we got today. So, yeah, it's looking a little funny. But anyways, if you were noticing that, they're broken, and that's why. All right, so first up, I'm going to show you a little bit of proof, if you will, of Paul reaching out to me in the spirit realm. Okay, so it was, I believe, July 14th when this all happened. For like all of a sudden, I was super inspired to reconnect to the spirit of Aphrodite. I had been connected to her, especially when I was in Greece a few years ago, hadn't been connected to her since my time in England, well, not consciously, and all of a sudden, like out of nowhere, so that's how like intuition can work, or these prompts from spirits. I was prompted to really connect with her. So I went on YouTube looking for guided meditations with Aphrodite, and I came across this one. Now, I just did the meditation. It was horrible. I don't recommend it. This person is not working with the light. I didn't notice the person or the channel who had uploaded this video until afterwards when I was given another sign. So let's look who uploaded it. His name is Paul Caruso, the name of my uncle. Now, I was actually, how I select things, just how I use the internet, how I, in all ways, if it's for research or if it's for personal development, I intuitively select everything. So I was intuitively guided towards this. And it's because to have this name synchronicity, it wasn't for the meditation itself. The meditation was absolutely awful. Like I said, he's not working with the light, and it's a horrible meditation. So my intuition guided me to it. For the name synchronicity, it's going to be a synchronicity to another sign that I'm about to show you. Okay, and so here, this is my post that I left, or my comment that I left on another Facebook page. It's an intuitive psychic medium who was doing this live reading, and I usually never participate in these things. What happened was, as soon as I'd finished that Aphrodite meditation, I'd get this notification on Facebook. I just, you know, toggle over to Facebook, get this notification that they are doing a live reading. And I just figured, oh yeah, since I got the notification, it kind of feels timely, like maybe I'm supposed to be there. So it was my intuition guiding me to it again. And so I go over, I ask my question. I forget exactly what my question was. And she had responded to say that you have a family member, a deceased family member with you in spirits. And I was like, oh, that's weird, because my family are, you know, they're a nightmare. And so hence I'm usually kind of cut off, like I've cut myself off from my deceased family in spirits because of their dark, you know, their dark activities while they were alive. However, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're still living anchored in the dark once they've passed over. A lot of them have anchored into the light and are helping, but, you know, just emotional things and trauma things had kind of prevent me from connecting to them myself, seeing this for myself, even though I am a psychic. You know, we don't always see everything. So she had this psychic, yeah, at first she said, you know, just family. And I was like, oh, I don't know who it would be. And then she said it's on your father's side. And I was like, oh, wow, maybe all I could think of was like my grandfather, my father's dad. And then I realized, oh, you know what? Also, I have another dead relative on my father's side that's close, like close generationally. That's my uncle, Paul. So I wasn't, yeah, he wasn't on my radar at all. And then I'm closing tabs, you know, I go back over to the YouTube meditation and I see the name Paul Caruso. So there's that synchronicity. And so this was my comments that I had left. It was, well, you can see, yeah, July 14th, 2019, at about midnight my time is when that reading was. And so I commented the next day and I said, you told me yesterday that a male relative from my father's side was with me. I hadn't even realized at the time that just before the reading, I already had a sign of who it was. I was guided to a certain meditation on YouTube, and it ended up being by a person with the same name as my father's brother who has passed. It's quite a unique name too. I've never seen it elsewhere before. The meditation was awful, but now I know I was guided to it to have that name synchronicity as a sign. I barely know this uncle, so I never would have guessed he is with me now. Just wanted to share the clarity that had come after your reading. All right, so that's just to show you, that I'm there are actually there's some supporting evidence that it's not all in my head. If you don't necessarily believe in psychics, or if you do believe in psychics and you're not quite sure if I'm telling the truth. Anyways, this is my motivation, and I'm going to be sharing a whole ton of information about Paul and his connection to Jimi, which is the real meat of it. But it's just very interesting, because we also have to acknowledge, like I said, we have to acknowledge the spiritual truth and the spiritual side. So Paul is here with me currently in this moment. He's partaking in this video to help us put the pieces together, because he's, as I said, anchored in the light and acting as a spirit guide. So we do need to pay homage to Paul and what he's doing for us here. So I'm going to tell you what I remembered of Paul from my cover personality, or from my front personality. So as an MK Ultra slave, you're given your front personality is the one that carries you through day-to-day life, and that carries the conscious story that contains the conscious story that you carry through all of your life. And so it is highly distorted. There can be truth in there, but there's also big gaps missing. And then the truth that's there can be distorted or twisted to create a whole new narrative, so that you don't remember any of the abuse, any of the corruption, all of that. So I'm going to share with you exclusively just what I knew from my front personality, the really basics about Paul, and my experiences with him. So my family is from New York. My father's side is from New York. My father was the only one from his family that left New York State, because I was raised in Maryland. And so I had met Paul only a handful of times, mostly as a kid, maybe once as a teenager. And I saw him only whenever my father drove my sister and I up from Maryland. My parents were divorced when I was around 7 or 8. And so he would drive us up from Maryland to New York to visit my grandmother, who lived outside of the city. Like for the most of my childhood, she lived in Kingston. And then my Uncle Paul had come over a handful of times. And I had limited interaction with him. Even when he did come over, he was the typical narcissist. He was very cold and cruel, completely disinterested in everybody else, especially children. It didn't matter that we were family. And he had this air that everybody was beneath him, and he was so miserable in life because everybody was beneath him. So my father would talk about him kind of on repeat. He would hit like the same highlights, that Paul was a genius, and so he dropped out of school. He didn't need school. He was bored in it. He didn't thrive. And also Paul was so smart. He was too smart for his own good, and it led to depression, which he then self-medicated with drugs and alcohol. And so according to my father, he battled drugs, alcohol, and homelessness because of the drugs and alcohol. He was also, his ingenuity extended to the arts, including cooking and music, and that he had studied natural health care. And then the handful of times that I had met Paul, he corroborated a lot of this. So it wasn't like just exclusively something made up by my father. Like, I remember we were watching, like, what was on TV. It was, sorry, I just had a flashback that was pretty intense. We were watching Emerald. If you remember Emerald, that's a famous New York Italian chef on TV. And all Paul could, like, focus on was his criticism. Paul was criticizing him for having burned the butter, and so he was criticizing him for being such a hack, and you know, Paul is a real chef and this man isn't, and you know, that classic narcissism. So I remember some details like that. And so another tidbit of information that my father had given, and which Paul had then corroborated, was that Paul was friends with and had played with Jimi Hendrix. As a kid, I didn't know the significance of this. Actually, I don't know if my father ever said he was a friend. I think he just said he played with him. And then it was only through my own research recently in the past few weeks that I discovered they were close friends. And it wasn't that they played like, so as a child, I imagined that they had played together like once, like a single gig. So I didn't think this was too significant. But they definitely played together regularly. Paul was featured on his albums. Paul usually played the harmonica. And so the other thing I remember from my childhood, from that friend's personality, the narrative that she carried, was that Paul was absconder in the last few years of my childhood. So I've been estranged from my family since I was 18, back in 2007. And so I haven't had any willing contact with my family since. So up until age 18, in the last few years, so I am about, like, I guess, you know, from age 16, so around 2005 to 2007, nobody could find Paul, allegedly. Nobody could find him, and they were really worried about him because of the drugs and alcohol and the homelessness. They didn't know if he was alive. And their mother, so my paternal grandmother, died in May 2007, and they didn't have any kind of ceremony for her because they couldn't find Paul and they wanted him to be there. So they put it off until the autumn. It was probably October of 2007. And I don't think Paul had still been, he still hadn't been located at that time. Or, yeah, that's like, it's a really vague, blurry memory. That was after I had moved out of my family home, so things had started, it was this really dramatic shift for me. So even for my front personality, like, things are really blurry. I have even, like, less memories, somewhat, of that time. Right, so I'm going to show you now Paul Caruso as a friend. I'm going to illustrate that he was a friend and a fellow musician with Jimi Hendrix, and also that he is the man who's related to me. Okay, so the first thing that I found in my research, now I haven't done actually extensive research on this because actually there's so much. You could dedicate a lifetime to researching Hendrix and his involvement in MK Ultra and the Illuminati, and even Paul's connection to him. So I've spent a few hours. So this is kind of like just lightly done, but it's going to show you those connections. So this was the first thing that came up. It's you know, this website, this New York website, news website. This was like the first hit, and so this is about his death, and it was published on May 9th, 2013. And it says, yeah, you can see Paul Caruso, musician, played with Hendrix. This is him at age 65, or actually, yeah, maybe 64. That was the year before, 2012. And that's his wife at the time, Carol, a woman who I never met. So I didn't know that he had married, or that he had a, yeah, I didn't know. I never knew him to have a romantic partner. All right, so let's go through this real quick. Paul Caruso, a well-known East Village musician who played with Jimi Hendrix and worked to help the neighborhood's homeless, died of a stroke on April 20th. at age 65. And so it corroborates some information here. Caruso grew up in the Bronx, and I'm going to be able to show you evidence that my father, Phil Caruso, states that he grew up in the Bronx. And yes, this is the same stuff that my father had told me right there. His musical talent secured a friendship with Hendrix, whose song, My Friend, featured Caruso playing the harmonica, a role incorrectly credited at the time of the album's release to a harp player named Jer. Caruso's association with Hendrix led to his appearance in a documentary about the rock star's life, which granted him some minor fame. And I'll go through more of this later, but just to hit some highlights. His friend Brandon says he was a celebrity, but he was a good friend. And then here we have something from my father. He was the most intelligent person I've ever known, said his brother Phil. As I said, that was all that my father harped on as I was a child. It was this whole narcissistic thing of, he was really concerned about, you know, status and appearance. So he loved that, you know, he could, like, it made him look good that he had this brother who was a genius and who had fame from playing with Hendrix. So he's just repeating this, like it's the scripts that I heard a million times. He's repeating it to this interviewer. Throughout his life, there had always been a lack of contentment, but these last years were the greatest of his life. So my father didn't even have contact with him in his last years. This was typical style of him to brush things under the rug, a lack of contentment. In this article, there's no mention of drugs, alcohol, homelessness himself, depression, no mention of that. They just make him sound very talented and happy and humble and serving the public. And so my father, you know, contrasts that with like this vague statement of there'd always been a lack of contentment, but like as in to make up for his seemingly failure of a life. That's how my narcissistic father would look at it. These last years were the greatest. So what? And he doesn't say like why were the last years of his life the greatest. You can't say why because he didn't even know him. He didn't even speak to him in his last years. So yeah, his greatest years of his life weren't before drugs and alcohol took over. They weren't, you know, before when he was playing with Hendrix and he had fame for this, you know, playing music which he was passionate about. No, it was these last years. So anyways, and there's a bunch of sketchy things in this article that we're going to go over too, but I just want to hit first showing you that this is my family member. So now you have here his brother Phil. As I said, my father's Phil Caruso. Now Phil has also been featured in a note that I posted on my No Witness Facebook page. If you're not aware, there's a Facebook page linked to this YouTube channel, so it's dedicated to whistleblowing. And there's actually a little bit more evidence over there, so go check it out if you haven't. So back on back in March, I posted something about my father, and it shows you his Facebook page. So that's why I'm on here. You know, it's a different topic. It's showing you evidence that he had sent me a death threats on behalf of the FBI. But you know, that's a whole different thing. Go visit the note there if you want to see it. I'll actually link it in the description box. All the links that I'm showing you today, I'm going to put in the description box below so you can check things out for yourself. So I'm showing you this because interestingly, my father has blocked me on Facebook, not after I posted this in March, but it was only a few weeks ago whenever there was a cyber handler commenting on I believe it was my No Witness channel, who said that they knew my father and but they will leave me and they just want to you know, change the world with light and love. And there was a lot of handler rhetoric and patterns there that I had pointed out. So I confronted them that they were a handler and they were doing recon to see what I remembered about my family's history. And that's exactly what it was, because apparently I remembered a little bit too much, because right after that was when my father blocked me on Facebook. So I guess they felt threatened about me being able to access his public Facebook. And so because I'm blocked there, that's why we are on this Facebook note of mine with screenshots of my father's Facebook profile. So first here in the notes, as we scroll down, you'll find here, this is a screenshot of a message he had sent me, the context of which is all put into this note. So that's not why we're here. We're just here to identify this man, Paul Caruso, this profile too, as my father. He identifies himself as my father as well. So next, we're looking at his profile here. See, same person, right? From Bronx, New York, just like Paul Caruso was from Bronx, New York, as it had mentioned in the Villager article. And then over here, we have Sarah Caruso, who is my sister, which obviously she indicates by calling him dad. Now over here, you're looking at a message from that same person, from my sister, Sarah Caruso. It's just a, an updated profile photo. And so this is corroborating once again that Paul Caruso, the one who is featured in the Villager article, who had those links to Jimi Hendrix, is the same person. So she says Uncle Paul's viewing is Monday night, funeral Tuesday morning. And then what she says here doesn't actually make sense. She probably has some program glitching here. But let's look at the dates, 4/21/13. Paul had died on 4/20. And so this is also relevant, as I said, or as I'll be going through later, the timing of when I was contacted is relevant. But, as that Villager article itself shows you, Paul had died on the 20th. And so this isn't a screenshot. This is the actual, as I'm scrolling here, this is the actual message thread. And as you can see, this also goes to show that I don't have any consensual contact with my family. Like, I've never responded. But anyways, all of that is just to say that Paul Caruso, who was linked to Jimi Hendrix, was in fact my uncle. Okay, next we're going to establish a little bit further Paul's connection with Jimi. Now we're here on the Wikipedia page, which is huge. There's a lot of information about Jimi, and there's a lot of controversy. So just real quick, I'm just going to point to the connection here. There's a lot of disinformation. This portion is disinformation. So, we're going to highlight here that Paul Caruso is mentioned as his friend, who Hendrix had accused him of robbing him, and he had to chase Caruso away from the residence. Okay, so next we're going to explore Hendrix's involvement as an MK Ultra slave, his involvement with the Illuminati, and now there's tons of information already out there. Now on his Wikipedia page, it does mention that he has a Cherokee background on his father's side. So, well, first let me back up to say my conclusion thus far in my research is that Hendrix, his father, his biological father, was actually benevolent, and it was his mother's side who was the really strong satanic side, and was responsible for programming him and for the abuse. So you'll find that his father's side had Cherokee backgrounds, and it's been well reported by now that the Illuminati like to breed with Native Americans for their spiritual powers and abilities. And that was the case with my family. I have Native American on my mother's side. So also his father, Al, had been drafted to the army or into the military. I think it was the army. And then when Hendrix he was away while Hendrix hadn't been born yet, when Jimi hadn't been born yet, and when he was born, Al wasn't permitted the time that he had a right to spend with his newborn son. So it was this specific right that everybody had to leave to spend time with a newborn child, and he was prohibited from this. So he didn't even meet Jimi for the first, I think it was 3 years of his life. So this is suspicious because he didn't choose to join the military. He was drafted, so he was forced away. He was forced geographically to move. And then you have also the programming that happens in the military, the mind control programming there. And then he wasn't there for the key points, the very beginning of Jimi's life. And so with MK Ultra, that's going to be the time when you receive the heaviest of the programming. It's a critical time for programming the victim. So it's like Jimi's father was kept away because he would have interfered with the programming, because he wouldn't have been complicit to it. He wouldn't be participating in it, or he would have tried to protect him, or just merely his presence as a benevolent being would be a form of light to Jimi. Because things look very ugly on the mother's side. So Wikipedia really glosses it over. So you have to read between the lines, but she was a violent drug addict, alcoholic, who barely had contact with any of her 5 children that she gave birth to. Now she only had 2 kids with Al, so Jimi and Leon were brothers, and those were the only 2 that she had with Al. And then Jimi had 3 younger siblings that would have been, half siblings, who his mother gave up for adoption. So he just got rid of them. It's like they weren't part of this bloodline deal. They either were given up for adoption or given into foster care. Now, even Leon was in and out of foster care all through his childhood. So yeah, in my research, just on the Wikipedia page there, you'll see that his mother, it says she had trouble raising her children, but it doesn't say why. But then you can see, when she died at the age of 33 from complications of cirrhosis of the liver, that it had to do with, her lifestyle with drugs and alcohol, because it also talks about drug dependency and violence. Now, it says there was violence in Jimi's home, but it doesn't say who it was from. So, you usually assume that the male is the aggressive one, but it's quite possible, the fact that it keeps it generic and vague, it's quite possible that she was the aggressor and that Al, Jimi's father, was innocent. He was not the violent one. He was not the abusive one. And it was mainly, or maybe solely, the mother. Yeah, so the Wikipedia page, says that she struggled to raise her children. Thus, Leon was in and out of foster care, and Jimi was passed around to friends and family. Why didn't he get into foster care? Well, and you probably know that foster care, there's lots of corruption, lots of satanic ritual abuse there. So it's like everybody, all the children had a specific role set out for them. The 3 younger ones who weren't from the same bloodline were just cast off. Leon's in and out of foster care, and Jimi's with these friends and family moving around. So he's being shifted and moved around all the time, which points to the programming. Now, there's tons of other evidence that he was programmed, but just to put it into context, why would this be happening with him as an MK Ultra slave? That's him being taken to all of these facilities for programming and being trauma bonded to various people, but not actually being able to form healthy attachments to any family figures, to any caregivers. You know, absolutely no stability in his life while he's being abused, and that physical movement is really destabilizing. So that's going to be particularly damaging to your psyche as a child growing up and developing, and that damage is going to last you through your life. And yeah, so here we're looking at the Wikipedia article. Forgot to mention that whenever Al was first able to, well, he was honorably discharged from the army, and so he did go looking for his family, and he couldn't even find Jimi, and he couldn't find his mother. And so also you'll see here, when Jimi was 9, his parents divorced, and the court granted Al custody of him and his brother Leon. So that goes to support that the mother was the abuser, because this isn't, you know, usually there's a favor for the mother. The court favors the mother as seeing her as, you know, like the go-to parent unless there's a real problem there. You know, if it's not shared custody, if one is going to get custody over the other, then it generally goes to the mother unless there's a real problem there. And especially, you know, back in 1951, when there was much more of this traditional mindset. So that shows you, for the court to give the custody to the father, there had to be a real problem with the mother. And so, yeah, that just goes to support the theory that she was the abuser. She was his programmer and his main handler, his main familial handler. Then also you'll see here, you'll find this in several articles, that as an adult, this actually happened after he awoke from MK Ultra, as he started to deprogram himself and recover repressed memories. He had confided to his girlfriend at that time, as the adult, that when he was a child, he had been the victim of sexual abuse by a man in uniform. So there's no specifics about, you know, what the authority was or the position, the profession of this man, but it was one in uniform. So one who's supposed to be, you know, serving people, who's in a position of authority. So again, that's something that happens, you know, that points to MK Ultra. The authorities are very much a part of MK Ultra, not to mention child abuse, or excuse me, sexual abuse as a child is a key component of the MK Ultra. So as I'd mentioned, by the age of 33, his mother had developed cirrhosis of the liver, and at around that time she had died when her spleen ruptured. And then Al, the father, refused to take, so Jimi was born, James here, but Jimi was actually given another name at birth, and his parents changed it when he was a child, and we'll get into that in a moment, how that was ritualistically done. But anyways, he refused to take the boys to their mother's funeral. So why that is significant is in Illuminati families, the funerals are always ceremonies. They're satanic ceremonies. So his father could have been, I feel that his father could have been protecting his sons by not taking them to the funeral. All right, so next let's jump to Hendrix's murder, his death. Officially on the record, well, it eventually got changed, the cause of death, to being an open case, but after, you know, a lot of pushing decades later to open an investigation into it. But at the time, so he had died in, I believe it was 1970. So at the time, the cause of death was, on the record, asphyxiation on his own vomit due to drug overdose. So we're going to look at how that is bogus. So there's a lot of contradicting information out there about Jimi being a heavy drug user and about him not. He had experimented with it, but he wasn't heavy in it. He wasn't dependent upon it. And the evidence supports that he was actually murdered. He was drowned with wine. And there's even his manager at the time had confessed to having ordered the hit. Now, Jimi died at the age of 27, which has inducted him, so to speak, into what's known as the 27 Club, which is a lot of famous musicians and other celebrities who died at the age of 27 at the hands of the Illuminati because they had awoken to their MK Ultra programming. So what happens is when the programming starts for you at birth or in utero, which it does for specifically the generational, for the bloodliners, for the multi-generational victims, those that come from the main Illuminati bloodlines, such as Jimi did and myself. What happens is you typically awaken from the programming in mid-20s, especially if you are a starseed or a light worker. You, as a lot of celebrities are. That's not to say plenty of them are corrupt, but there are some that are light workers, and that's one of the reasons why they're targeted. So Jimi had awoken to his programming at age 25, and then for those 2 years, the Illuminati could not regain control of him. He had a spiritual awakening as well, which it always goes hand in hand if you're truly deprogramming from MK Ultra. And you see that spiritual awakening and the awakening from the MK Ultra through his music, through his lyrics, and through his interviews. And so when the Illuminati could not regain control over him, he was assassinated. So here we have good old mainstream media, the Telegraph, reporting on what they call the theory of murder, which is something that, you know, mainstream media, they'll report on these things whenever it's already been leaked and there's so much momentum behind it. They have to kind of get in line with it, but then, you know, the controlled opposition, they'll do what they can to twist and tweak things or to distort it. So we're going to take a look at this. So let's look at the headline. The murder theory plausible, says ER doctor. This, you'll see through the article, this headline is not at all congruent with the content of the article, such is very often the case with controlled opposition, with, you know, false media reporting. All right, so this was published back in 2009. John Bannister, the on-call registrar at the now-closed St. Mary Abbott's Hospital in Kensington, said in an interview that the patients, Jimi Hendrix, seemed to have drowned in a large amount of red wine. The account fits with one given by James Tappy Wright, a 65-year-old former manager who worked for Hendrix's manager, Mike Jeffrey. Wright has claimed in a new book, yeah, that's why the Telegraph is coming out with this. There was this new book published that had outed this murder. So Wright has claimed in a new book that indebted Jeffrey had taken out a $2 million life insurance policy on the star amid concerns about his increased drug taking, and that he told him Hendrix was worth more to him dead than alive. So right there you have motive for the hit, and this is one of the reasons why they've built up this false narrative that Hendrix was a drug addict. So we'll take a look at that here shortly, that false narrative. He alleges that Jeffrey confessed to him that he had ordered the killing a month before his death in a plane crash. That's kind of a convoluted sentence, so let's break it down. So Mr. Wright is saying that the manager, Jeffrey, had confessed to Wright that he had ordered Hendrix's murder. A month later, Mr. Wright dies in a plane crash. So that's suspicious there. He confesses and then he disappears, he dies. Could be assassinated, as the pattern typically goes with Illuminati. The official version of Hendrix's death at the age of 27 is that he died from choking on vomit after a drugs overdose. Wright's version is that Hendrix was killed on the orders of Jeffrey by a gang who broke into his hotel room and forced wine and painkillers down his throat until he drowned. Mr. Bannister, 67, that said that he had no idea who Hendrix was when he arrived early on the morning of September 18th, 1970, but remembers being perplexed by his height. He was hanging over the table we had him on by about 10 inches, he told the Times newspaper. They said he fought to resuscitate him, but there was no hope of survival. We worked very hard, about half an hour, but there was no response at all. It really was an exercise in futility, he said. Somebody said to me, you know who that was? Jimi Hendrix. And of course I said, who's Jimi Hendrix? He said that Wright's description in his memoir, Rock Roadster, of Hendrix's demise sounded plausible because of the volume of wine. Now listen to this. These are the facts that they tried to, distort into like, oh, just some, possible theory. The amount of wine that was over him was just extraordinary. Not only was it saturated right through his hair and shirt, but his lungs and stomach were absolutely full of wine. I've never seen so much wine. We had a sucker that you put down into his trachea, the entrance to his lungs and the whole of the back of his throat. We kept sucking him out and it kept surging and surging. He had already vomited up masses of red wine, and I would have thought there was half a bottle of wine in just his hair. He had really drowned in a massive amount of red wine. So let's focus on that. What is he saying? He had actually drowned in a massive amount of red wine. He didn't, that was the reality. And then they say, oh, it's a plausible theory. Plausible theory that, the official death report is inaccurate. And then look at what they do. So they drop this like shock on you, and then they counter it by discrediting the doctor, like just no segue or anything. They just, boom, end of article. And now what? Bannister now lives in Sydney and worked as a doctor until 92 when he was deregistered for fraudulent conduct. So they're trying to discredit him. Now we don't know the nature of him being deregistered. We don't know the nature of the fraudulent conduct. We don't know any of that. So we can't form an opinion on if it is legitimate or not. But if you're somebody who's reading and relying on mainstream media, what's expected is that you take this to mean, well, he's not very credible. So, let's discount this whole theory. So next, whenever you just look up, Jimi's death. So here I've just done a search for his blood alcohol level, and you'll see consistency of all of these articles saying that he was murdered, that the official cause of death is inaccurate, such as right here. The post-mortem report states that the blood alcohol level was not excessive, about 20 milligrams over the legal drinking limits. So what happens is the only alcohol that's in his bloodstream is what had been absorbed from the drowning before he had actually died. So he wasn't intoxicated at the time of his death. That was not contributing to his death. And you'll also see that, there's a whole bunch. There's this psy-op that Jimi had died of a heroin overdose, even though the coroner said there was zero trace of heroin in his system or any traces of heroin use on his body, no needle marks, no historical needle marks. He wasn't a drug user. He wasn't a heroin user. But his manager, Jeffrey, had used that as an excuse for taking out this life insurance policy, even though he also adds the words, well, he's worth more to me dead than alive, which indicates guilt, a motive for murder. And so you see that disinformation on his wiki page too. And there's contradicting information there. Some people, people who knew Hendrix at the time are saying that he was heavy into it and he started at this time. Others are saying, well, actually started it a little bit later. And he was quite naive. Nothing really adds up. There's just too much contradiction. And then they use it to paint him as this violent, horrible person, which again still contradicts so many accounts. who say that Hendrix was shy and sensitive, even all throughout his childhood into his adult years. And then you even have, he was charged with possession for drugs that were planted on him. So let's take a look at this part right here. Hendrix is passing through customs at Toronto International Airport on May 3rd, 1969, when authorities found a small amount of heroin in his luggage. 4 hours later, he was formally charged with drug possession and released on $10,000 bail. He was required to return a couple days later for an arraignment hearing. And it was a stressful incident, weighed heavily on his mind during the 7 months that he awaited trial, which took place in December. Now, for the Crown to prove possession, they had to show that Hendrix knew that the drugs were there. During the jury trial, he testified that a fan had given him a vial of what he thought was legal medication, which he put in his bag. He was acquitted of the charges. Mitchell and Redding later revealed that everyone had been warned about a planned drug bust the day before flying to Toronto. Both men also stated that they believed that the drugs had been planted in Hendrix's bag without his knowledge. So, you know, this was like a cause of trauma for him. It would have interfered for his life for 7 months. And the year, you know, 1969, right before his death. So this, it seems like he had awoken at, in 68, if you're looking at his lyrics and how his music changed, it looks like he had awoken in 68. So for those last 2 years of his life, he would have been heavily targeted with obstruction. He would have been seriously harassed, gang stalked, everything. You know, they didn't have the term gang stalking back then, I don't believe so. So we have that terminology to apply to the same circumstances. So even though he was acquitted, he had to go through that trauma of, you know, not knowing what was going to happen, and also wondering who had planted this on him, who had betrayed him, who can he trust, who can he not trust. You know, as he's waking up to his MK Ultra, he's now wondering who is, you know, it's not just a matter of trust, it's a matter of who's a fucking Satanist trying to destroy me and my entire life. Who is a CIA agent, or, you know, another form of agent working for the Illuminati. So this is a big ordeal. Even though he was acquitted, this would have been a big ordeal on his life. And it's also trying to trump up that narrative of he was a drug user. So a lot of people, even though he's acquitted, a lot of people are going to say, oh, well, it's still suspicious. So here we have again mention of my uncle Paul Caruso with him, tying up with this narrative of Hendrix being a violent drug addict. So Hendrix was renting a house in Benedict Canyon, California in '69. So about a year after he had awoken, so he's going to be gang stalked and harassed. So this house was burglarized. Because later, it claims that he was later under the influence of drugs and alcohol, which was when he punched his friend Paul Caruso and accused him of the theft. He then chased Paul away from the residence while throwing stones at him. So let's stop right there. In essence, you know, if there's any shred of truth to this, if it's not entirely manufactured, it sounds like, you know, controlled opposition to the fact that he had realized Paul was his handler. So I'm telling you, from, you know, from being related to Paul, from having this family of Satanists, there was not one benevolent member in my family, not one, throughout the whole extended family. And, you know, knowing Paul, even just what I know from my cover personality, I know there's more to it. There's a lot of my memory still missing. I know I had been involved with Paul in more ways than I remember. In the really conscious sense, I haven't explored those memories too much, to be honest. But that's just the pattern of healing that I can go with, that there's always more than what you remember about the people in your life. So it's looking like, in reality, what happened here was Paul did rob him. Not just rob him, burglarized him. So that's like you know, a break-in, that's violence, that's destruction. That's not, you know, I took money out of your wallet, I snuck money out of your wallet. That's burglarizing the home. And Hendrix had confronted him on it. So it sounds like Hendrix had realized that he was his handler. He wasn't his friend, he was his handler. And so he chased Caruso away from the residence while throwing stones at him. Again, if there's a shred of truth to that, why did he have to chase Caruso away? Like, why was Paul needing to be chased away? Why, you know, if he wasn't wanted there, why didn't he go away? So this sounds like self-defense to me. If he was also throwing stones at him, it sounds like self-defense. And so the next sentence is another incident that they've chosen to tie in with this and the whole drug abuse and violence narrative. A few days later, his girlfriend, Carmen Borrero, required stitches after he hit her above her eye with a vodka bottle during a drunken, jealous rage. Now, there's no, well, it doesn't say that he was charged with it. If we look at the wiki reference here, if we look at the wiki reference, it is citing a biography of Jimi Hendrix called Room Full of Mirrors. So, you know, we would have to explore that to know if there's any, just to know the circumstances around that, if there were charges brought, or if they're just adding this as a claim to support the false narrative. So at the very least, you can see there was friction between Jimi Hendrix and Paul Caruso. There was friction, and that was happening the year before he died, after he woke from MK Ultra. Goes to support Paul being his handler. So next we have a gem of a blog that I'm going to share with you. We're just going to touch on it, and like I said, I'm going to have all the links in the description box for you to explore, because this is a deep rabbit hole. They have a lot of information here. This is really fascinating, and a lot of you know, external links as further resource. All right, so here at this blog, Truth Seeker 444, Sandra Barr has written this article about 3 years ago. Now, she's writing about the parallels between Prince and Jimi Hendrix, which there are a lot of, and I'll let you know after reviewing it and doing my research, it's looking like there is some kind of ritual significance between black magic ritual significance between Hendrix and Prince, and also like a transference of their spirits or of what was programmed into their spirit. So transference from Hendrix into Prince. And then all of this also comes up on The Simpsons. Now, this just goes as further evidence of Jimi being an MK Ultra slave. So this is the juicy stuff here. So just to hit on some of the parallels. Yeah. So number one, Purple Rain, Purple Haze. So both stars had a fondness for the color purple, and, you know, they're creating music. Even like, look, they dress a little bit similarly. You know, they're in different eras, and yet they're still dressing a little bit similarly. And so they're also writing about the color purple. Now, this could have been programming, or it could have been something spiritual, because their music did take a spiritual turn in the last years of their life. Also, Prince was a Jehovah's Witness. Hendrix's birth name was Johnny Allen Hendrix, J-A-H, which is one of the shortened versions of Jehovah. And one of his biggest hit singles was All Along the Watchtower. The Watchtower Society is the name of the governing body of the Jehovah's Witnesses. It's also the name of the magazine distributed by the Jehovah's. So you can see that right there. And I'll add my testimony to your name, including the initials, whenever you're Illuminati, are very specifically chosen There's you have geometria, you have the numerology behind your name, and it's such layered, not just symbolism, but your name is, you know, the Illuminati believe, and you know, it's true, but they're kind of exploiting it for dark purposes. The Illuminati believe that your name carries all of this spiritual and also this genetic information about you. And so they will create things to support their dark agenda. And so there would have been a ritual purpose for having changed Jimi's name. He was born he was born Johnny Allen Hendrix. I'm not sure at what age exactly, but his parents then changed his name to James Marshall Jimi. So there would have been a ritual purpose for that. None of this is done by accident, for sure. And also, just to continue to corroborate the thing with the names and even the initials. So you might be saying, okay, so the name has significance, but the initials, you know, is there really a level there? Well, I'll give you myself as an example to consider. My name is Rachel Ann Caruso, R-A-C. Look at the first part of my first name, R-A-C. Look at the first part of my last name reversed, R-A-C. That's a whole lot of coincidence for it to be really just a coincidence. Like I said, it's not just your name, it's not just the Rachel, it's not just the Ann, it's not just the Caruso, it's the initials and what they represent as well. So there is a ritual purpose to my name. It's very involved. I can't get into that in this video, but it does have to do with our Merovingian heritage. So that'll be an interesting other topic to explore. All right, and then furthermore, if you're not already aware that the Jehovah's Witnesses are, you know, just another faction of the Illuminati, of the Satanic Illuminati cults. You know, every organized religion is a spin-off of Satanism. And so they've been widely identified as occults. And so next, and you know, also just to give further corroboration, one of my romantic handlers whenever I was an adult was from a family of Jehovah's Witnesses, so I had personal involvement with that. And that's just what I remember from my cover personality. So next, both men had serious issues with people and corporations within the music industry who were ripping them off, claiming ownership of them and their music. Prince had long drawn-out legal battles against his former record label, Warner Brothers. He fought for control of his master recording and his name. Just prior to Hendrix's death, he was meeting solicitors about the contracts he had been tied into. And then there's also more information about about how I think the Warner Brothers did eventually gain control over Jimi as well, and they produced a documentary 3 years after his death as part of the controlled opposition. So next up, both men were speaking out about political issues and against the establishment. Both men were funding subversive groups. Hendrix was supporting the Black Panthers, and Prince had donated £50,000 to a 9/11 Truth group. Both men were musical geniuses who died under very mysterious circumstances. Both men at the time of death were taking their music in a more spiritual direction. So as I said, again, that's very key to showing that they've had a spiritual awakening, and which coincided with their MK Ultra awakening. Next up, Prince recorded an album, Rainbow Children. Hendrix made an album and film just prior to his death called Rainbow Bridge. Again, these are actually specific spiritual concepts. Just because the name rainbow is in there doesn't make it spiritual. Rainbow Children and the Rainbow Bridge are these specific spiritual concepts that they are both, you know, creating music to once they've had their spiritual awakening. And it has to do with the ascension of the earth, the change in tides from dark to light. Now this bit here is specifically about Prince. All of this is about all of this in the article links Prince and Jimi together, so it's all relevant. But this bit is especially relevant to me and what I'm going to share with you, because there's the numerology that's being used ritualistically of number 14. So just prior to Prince's death, he posted a selfie on Instagram with the caption, "Just when you thought you were safe." At some time after it was posted, the caption was removed, yet the picture remained. It was the last thing he had posted before he died. It was published on April 14th at 9:05 a.m., which is the day he played at the Fox Theater in Atlanta. Within 14 hours of him posting it, his private jet had to make an emergency landing in Illinois, and 7 days later he was dead. So we have, as I said, the numerology of 14 here. This isn't a coincidence. There's going to be more synchronicities to it. So immediately after his death, the mainstream media embarked on a global campaign to besmirch and defame both their reputations. With Hendrix, they said he had committed suicide, and that he was a heroin addict who had choked on his own vomit while stoned. With Prince, they said he had a full-blown AIDS and that he was a drug addict. And they make a good point here. Compare the death of Bowie to the death of Prince. Right after Bowie died, he was given demigod status, and the A-listers were queuing up to say what a wonderful guy he was. From the day Prince died, they had been quoting unnamed music industry insiders, drug dealers, and alleged associates, and it's all been derogatory. Bowie was, of course, a good little puppet. He never spoke out about chemtrails or the sharks within the music industry. He was a longtime heavy drug user, but not a mention of that after his death, or even a suggestion that his years of serious drug use was in any way tied to his death at a fairly young age. And then we also have that parallel to My Uncle Paul, that article that, says he's a celebrity, paints him as this great guy. Also, I didn't show you all of it yet, but saying how he served the he served the homeless, and he died, fairly young. 65 is not that old. And it's the same thing. No suggestion that his years of serious drug abuse was in any way responsible or tied to his death at a fairly early age. So it's that similar narcissistic Illuminati cover-up tactic, just smooth things over. The golden glaze, as if they're your ally, and then besmirch them if they aren't. Both men were reported to be suffering from influenza just prior to their deaths. And so you can see it's on Hendrix's, and then it's also on Prince's wiki pages, and there's also suspicious stuff around them having the flu, for Hendrix, he had given an interview 11 days before he had died. He had a hanky in his hand, and he blew his nose, and he puts his sniffles down to the change in climate, touring from country to country. The change in climate does not seem to be affecting his bandmates, however, who are seen with him. But we have this numerology synchronicity again of the 14th. And like I said, these things aren't coincidences. Prince had rescheduled his performance for the 14th. Now performances are always used as a ritual, especially for these big stars such as Prince. They're always going to be used as black magic rituals. So the dates, the numerology behind it all is so important. So we have, that number 14, April 14th, coming up again. And it's not even just 14, it's April 14th, that same day that he had posted this, selfie. Oh, right. Not even, so 14 hours after him posting it, on the day that he was supposed to play, 14 hours after him posting that selfie, his plane had to come down because of his illness. Right, so essentially, this is looking like they were both drugged for the last few weeks of their lives. Now, Warner Brothers is another tie. When both men were when both men died, they were under contract to Warner Brothers on April 14th, 2014. Hello. Now, this blogger does not point out, they do go into numerology later on for other things, but they don't point out the numerology here. So once again, on April 14th, in a different year, which year? 2014, Billboard magazine reported that Prince had done a deal with Warner. Just over 2 years later, April 21st, Prince was dead, and Warner's had the license for most of his music. Now, the blogger says that the section about the Warner Brothers tie to both Hendrix and Prince is so lengthy and complex, they had to put it in a separate blog, and that's saying something because this is an in-depth blog itself. All right, next, let's look at Larry Graham. Larry was a longtime friend and collaborator of Prince. It was his influence that persuaded Prince to convert to be a Jehovah's Witness. In an Associated Press interview on May 3rd, 2016, he had said that he had seen Prince just 3 days before he died and that he seemed well, bar a cold that he had. At sometime after the death of Hendrix, Eric Clapton gave an interview and discussed his relationship with Hendrix. He says that he'd seen Jimi at a Sly and the Family Stone gig in the Lyceum in London the day before he died. Jimi died on September 18th, 1970. Between 66 and 72, Larry Graham was the bassist for Sly and the Family Stone. So Larry had seen Jimi the day before he died and Prince 3 days before he died. As I say, what are the chances? Prince and Hendrix were two of the most iconic musicians of our time, and Larry had seen them both just before they died, 46 years apart. So next we're going to be looking at Hendrix's his content, his musical content, which illustrated when he started to wake up from MK Ultra and had a spiritual awakening. So he has this song, Room Full of Mirrors, from his last album. So all of this is always, arts, when the artist is, not only when the Illuminati are trying to co-opt things, but when the artist has awoken and they are writing from, like truly writing from themselves, everything's symbolical. First rays of the new rising sun, that's talking about his awakening. I used to live in a room full of mirrors. All I could see was me. Well, I took my spirit and I crashed my mirrors. Now the whole world is here for me to see. I've got a whole world that's here for me to see. Now I'm searching for my love to be. Broken glass was falling in my brain, cutting and screaming and crying in my head. Broken glass was falling in my brain. It used to fall on my dreams and cut me in my bed. It used to fall on my dreams and cut me in my bed. I said making love was strange in my bed. Now, I want to take this opportunity to deconstruct this from, as a MK Ultra slave, what this means. So they do, the blogger does mention a little bit. I'm going to go into more detail. They say, anyone who knows about MK Ultra program will know that mirrors are a vital part of the trauma-based mind control programming. Michael Jackson wrote all his songs in a room full of mirrors. Right, so yes, the blogger is correct with all of that. So let's look a little bit deeper. I took my spirit and crashed my mirrors, not the mirrors, my mirrors. He's talking about his programming. And he's saying that it came from his spirit, from his soul. That is, if you're going to have a real awakening from MK Ultra, it's going to come from your soul. And then he says, I've got a whole world that's here for me to see. So he's not just talking about, oh, like the whole world. He starts with that, but then he elaborates and he changes a little. A whole world, this whole realm of Illuminati, of MK Ultra, that wasn't there until he crashed the mirrors. And also, I'm sure there's some symbology behind using the word crashed and not something else to denote that he destroyed them, because you don't normally say I crashed, you say I smashed. So there's something significant there, which I'm not aware of yet. And there's some symbolism here that I don't know. I know every line here is symbolic. I don't know the precise meaning of it, but I'll share what I do. So he's talking about broken glass falling in his brain. So not even in his head, but in his brain, like in the mental scape, in the programming. And he's, you know, saying that it's cutting and screaming and painful. And he says it used to fall on his dreams and cut him in his bed. And then he goes to, I said making love was strange in my bed. So this could be about the implanted and manipulated dreams that MK Ultra victims are given, and or it could be about a lot of rituals that take place and abuse. We are actually programmed to believe it was just a dream, so we'll retain memory of it somewhat, but it will feel and seem like it was just a dream that we had at night while we were sleeping. And this could also be talking about, you know, sexual abuse being a part of those rituals that he believed were just dreams. Because why would making love be strange in his bed if he had that trauma of sexual abuse? All right, so next we're looking at the smear campaigns that had been launched to cover up the murders. At the time of their deaths, these smear campaigns were launched. So when Hendrix died, on the morning of his death, Eric Burden of the Animals announced to the press that he had died by his own hand and that he had committed suicide. He later recanted this, but the headlines on the TV and newspapers were that he had taken his own life thanks to Burden telling this to the press. So of course that's going to be what the public, that's the first thing the public sees, and that's going to be what they hold on to, the information that sticks to them. And so he recants because it's, you know, he knows he's going to be proven wrong. He only does that to get this whole media campaign going. That, you know, you can't unring a bell, so to speak. So the autopsy on Hendrix revealed that he didn't have one needle mark on his body, no recent needle marks and no historical needle marks. Yet the press reported that he had died choking on his own vomit after overdosing on heroin. They also say he was drunk, and we've already covered this. He wasn't drunk, and the wine involved with him was from a drowning, not from consuming it. So this article goes on to talk about both Jimi and Prince's struggle with their freedom of, you know, their, or excuse me, like gaining the rights to their content and being ripped off, having fraudulent contracts. And so a lot of this is revealed in Simpsons episodes with Prince. Not so much, not that this blogger is revealing about Hendrix. However, there's that parallel once again. So we go on here to learn about the struggle of the, you know, what happens with the estate. So after Hendrix's death, his father inherited his estate. In '66, Al had married a Japanese woman. She had 5 children. 4 of them were grown when Al married her. He adopted the youngest daughter, Janie Lisa, and he put that daughter in charge of running the estates. You know, and this is interesting, seeing as how he didn't adopt, you know, yeah, he didn't adopt any of the children from Jimmy's mother. They were given up, remember? They were given up to adoption or foster care. So this is all very orchestrated strategically. However, I'm going to explain that I think, you know, Al was forced into this. When Al died in 2002, he left the managing estate to his adopted daughter and Robert Hendrix, a cousin of Jimmy's. Robert had since died, and the entire estate is now run by the adopted daughter. She was only a child when Jimmy died. She only met him 3 to 4 times. Each time was brief backstage at the concerts. So Janie ends up getting sued over this ordeal because, yes, she had been spending millions on herself and her husband while the trustees had been getting nothing. Yep. So Experience Hendrix is the company that Janie controls. She constantly reiterates that the company is run by the Hendrix family and all profits go to the Hendrix family. This is not true. All profits go to her and her husband. The 2004 court case showed she had been misappropriating funds, and her extravagant lifestyle meant there were no profits left to be divided amongst the beneficiaries. Jimi had 2 children, a daughter in the US and a son in Sweden. Neither of them profit from their father's estates. Janie, on the other hand, seems to be doing nicely from it. She also lost one of the few Hendrix guitars that was returned to the family after he died. She says her ex-husband stole it, and legal action is ongoing for it to be returned to the estates. Jimi was close to his brother Leon, and he has had various court battles with Janie over the estates. Now, there is a ton more in this article linking these parallels between, excuse me, I'm going to sneeze, sorry. I had to pause before. Sorry, I just couldn't catch the pause button before I had to stop to sneeze. So there's tons more information here linking both men to MK Ultra and the Illuminati, and also showing you these precise parallels between them amongst it all. So you're going to get further information if you go and explore that blog article, and it's really fascinating, and they go into numerology a good bit. Now, really quickly, I know this is a long video. We've gone down lots of rabbit holes, so I'm going to be tying this up here shortly. I just want to go back to touch on Paul's death and how it's suspicious. So, as I said, usually with Illuminati members, their death is harnessed as a ritual sacrifice. If they are not murdered, there might be like a hand nudging them towards whenever the Illuminati is done with them, or they need their death for a certain sacrifice, they will insert themselves to influence what could look like organic death cause, so that they die when they want them to. Okay, so I'll skip over a few parts. You can read it here, pause the video and read it here, or just visit the website itself. But here's something suspicious. We were playing music in the park just a few hours before this happened, said one of his friends. So that's interesting to say. It's just interesting wording. When somebody has allegedly died of a stroke, you don't say like this had happened, you say, before they died. Or yeah, you would say before they died. So he's making it sound like something external had happened. So Caruso's artistic talents were not only in music, but extended also into painting and cooking, according to his son Avian, who had been estranged from his father for more than 10 years, only hearing of his death a few days after it happened. So you should be wondering, why was his own son estranged from him for a decade? Could it have been for a similar reason for why I'm estranged from my family? Because he's trying to extricate himself from the satanic abuse of, his own father. And also, let's look at this part. He heard of his death a few days after it happened. So his own son. Whereas I was estranged from my family for at least 6 years at that time. And I had been notified about it the day after. And this isn't even my father. This is my uncle, who I had, allegedly, according to the screen memories and the construct of reality that was given to me, I had barely known him. So that, these inconsistencies, this just doesn't match up, these two scenarios. So you have to be wondering, why was I contacted right away? It was my family trying to draw me back in. Then also ask yourself, why wasn't Avian contacted right away? If they could contact me the next day, why couldn't they contact Avian, his own son? like I said, we were both estranged from our families. So next, his friends, Brendan, says he was writing a book that will unfortunately never be published. Doesn't say what the book is about. Could he have been writing about something that would have gone against the Illuminati agenda or have exposed them in some way, and he was assassinated for it? You know, similar to so many other accounts of, you know, these really coincidental deaths that are connected to the Illuminati. And so then I just want to hit on one last part in here. They're talking about him doing, you know, delivering food to the homeless. So one of his friends says, we would do the food runs from Trader Joe's for the homeless people. He'd get a big van and we'd just drive around picking up food. So this is kind of strange wording. He makes it sound like really casual and informal. Like this wasn't an actual arrangement, and it's just a weird way to word this. He'd get a big van. So it wasn't like he owned a van. He's saying like on a repeat basis, he would find access to a van that he didn't own. And, you know, no formalities, no schedule or anything to this, no structure. They just drive around picking up food. So given everything that we know about Paul, that he was an evil, satanic Illuminati member, this is suspicious that he's involving himself with homeless people, because what else do we know about homeless people? Large parts of the homeless demographic is made up of TIs, targeted individuals. Some of them might be MK Ultra, some of them might have been targeted for another reason. And sure, some of them are what we call mentally ill, which always comes about from a reason. It's not that your brain is broken, you're not a robot, your brain doesn't just break and then it causes mental illness, something that happened to you to cause mental illness. Sometimes that is targeting, other times it's other forms of abuse. But they are a vulnerable demographic that are widely used for satanic ritual abuse and for experimentation and other forms of exploitation. So the fact that he's involved with the homeless people with this big van that he would just acquire on a repeat basis is suspicious. And something else that doesn't add up, but I don't really have the conclusion to this, is, you know, he's helping these local or these homeless people, and says over the years, so the narrative that my family had fed to me was that Paul always struggled with homelessness. So at what point did he stop being homeless and start helping them, you know, supposedly instead, or become involved with them from the other side of it? Because as I said, I don't think he was helping them. So yeah, this is interesting because, you know, according to my family, he has struggled with homelessness for most of his adult life after, yes, I remember now, they said after his fame had fizzled out, the fame that he had acquired from playing with Hendrix, after Hendrix died and his fame had fizzled out, that was when he started to downward spiral, according to them. Okay, now I want to share with you, yeah, I forgot totally about these parts. We gotta go into this too. Hang in there with me, or if you need to, you know, just pause the video and come back to it. This is really interesting information. All right, so this article was posted in 2013, you know, the year that shortly after, just a couple weeks after Paul died, and I showed you that I started looking into Paul on the 14th of July. That is when he came to me, and that's when I started to look into him. Now look at this. The only comments here at first, whenever I came to the article on the 14th or the 15th, as I said, this was the first piece of information I found whenever I started to look them up. Somebody had just posted a comment. So, you know, 6 years go by, no comments. But then there's a comment precisely 2 or 3 days before I hop onto this article. Paul Caruso will always be immortalized due to Hendrix using his name as a character being interviewed on the album Axis Bold as Love. He also can be heard in several bootleg recordings he and Hendrix made. His problem was drugs and alcohol. They take their toll, shorten your life, etc. All right. Now also look at this. 4/14. We have that numerology again. April 14th. Like I said, it's the number 14 being repeatedly used, but also specifically April 14th, 4/14. Next up, we have this commenter. So whenever I came onto this article around like, it was a few days after, I tried to post something and it would not work. And I tried again and again from different browsers for the next week or so, and it would not work. Yet during that time, yeah, it was for a couple weeks. Like I would just routinely come back and try to see like, you know, what's going on here, because this person can post, but I can't. So during that same time, somebody else is able to post, and yet once again, I cannot. So Michael Stewart says, Paul Caruso in a short film segment, Paul Caruso appears in a short film segment of the movie, a film about Jimi Hendrix that was released by Warner Brothers in '73, where Paul is one of many musicians and friends of Jimi's who were interviewed in the film. Paul is also, as previously been mentioned, appears as the character interviewing Jimi at the beginning of the track EXP on the side one track of the Jimi Hendrix Experience album Axis Bold as Love that was released in '67 in the UK and early '68 in the USA. All right, so first off, I'm going to let you know this is a real movie. I can't find it online anywhere. I can't find it to watch. So I don't know what Paul says. This is the movie that's referenced in the wiki article. Sorry, I might be making a mistake here. Okay, my mistake. I was going to say that was the reference for Paul's involvement with, you know, Hendrix's violence. That wasn't the reference cited on the wiki article. It was another biography. So anyways, what's interesting about the nature of this, you know, not only is this happening, do these comments appear, you know, several years after the fact and only whenever I start looking into this, but it's the nature of them. The way they just specifically tell me, how Paul is involved with Hendrix. They get into detail. So it's not even like, oh, hey, you know, I knew Paul personally. I mean, the first guy, he gives a cheap attempt to make it like, you know, he does know him personally. He doesn't make that statement, but he claims that his problem was drugs and alcohol. And so he's alluding that he knew him, because you'd have to know that he was involved in drugs and alcohol. And both of them just get so specific and matter-of-factly. Like they just come on here to state the facts about how Paul was involved with Jimi, or like some things that I can witness for myself about Paul being involved with Jimi. I don't know what the whole purpose of this is. This is some kind of psy-op. This isn't coincidental. And especially with the numerology and the timing of it, it's not divine timing. This is something that is Illuminati run. There's some kind of psy-op going on here. And psy-ops are part of, every psy-op is a ritual in itself. It is a black magic ritual in itself. A lot of people don't realize that, but then there's layers of it. It's like, why, you know, what kind of mind control program are they running with the psy-op? You know, they might be trying to control what I learn. Yeah, who knows? So then I had actually, I had started to make this video, and I was like, you know what? I want to try once again to post comments. And so I did. And what do you know? It fucking went through as I was making this video. So I don't know why that is. yeah, I say here, I first started posting this on August 3rd, and the time around that, I think my timing is a little bit off. Like I kept, you know, kind of vague notes for myself, but I had copied and pasted. I know this happens to me so often, not being able to post something, this technical interference, that I already know to copy everything that I am about to post before I hit that post button, because a lot of times it just fucking disappears. So I copy it and I paste it and I save it. And so I had that to just come back here and copy and paste and try again. So I out everything about Paul being Illuminati and satanic, and me coming from, you know, multi-generational MK Ultra. So, you know, it's no wonder why they would have interfered with that. Was this divine intervention? As soon as I started to speak out about it, it's like there was some energy backing this, that I could publish it, maybe, or maybe they allowed it so that they could interact with me more on here for this further psy-op that they had initiated. And then, so the funny thing is, if you go to the website, you'll see that I've posted on here twice, and that's because when I first tried this, I even refreshed the page and it wasn't coming up. So I was like, oh, they did it again. And I was like, maybe it's the character count. Maybe that's too long, even though it doesn't say that there's a character count limit. So then I tried a shorter version, and that didn't show either. And I refreshed the page, neither of them showed. And that was on a different day, actually. Whenever I first started putting this video together. And so I pull this article back up, and they're both there now. On a different day, they're both my comments are there. Nobody's replied yet. All right. So what a long rabbit hole we just journeyed down together. Thanks for going with me on the journey. We uncovered a whole bunch of stuff. Like I said, there's a lot of it's out there. And even though I've compiled some of it together here, there's the additional insights from me, from firsthand experience as a bloodliner and as the relative of Paul. So the topic deserves discussion. You know, Jimi, that deserves discussion just on its own. And having personal involvement, like my family being personally involved with his MK Ultra abuse, that needs to be known. But also this has, I know that it has larger implications that we can see at first glance. Everything is connected. Everything is connected. You think that these different factions of the Illuminati and these different Illuminati operations are like isolated. They're not. You know, one cult or one abuser on one side of the world from, you know, from something like very specific, you have them, they're group A, right? Then you have group B, which is another cult or another abuser, another organization or corporation, with a whole other, you know, it seems like they're doing a whole other agenda, different identity, different part of the world, and you think they're unrelated. They're not. Everybody knows everybody. A and B, not only do they know each other, they're working together, and their agendas, what they're doing, are interlinked. They look completely different. They're always interlinked. So I don't know how yet necessarily, but this is interlinked with everything else that I've been experiencing and disclosing. The New Age cults, the corrupt, fraudulent global asylum system, the national referral mechanism, the secret space program. You know, eventually, there's so much, I don't even know where to fucking start. So I have this one loose thread that I could pull out today, and so that was one of the reasons why I was able to do this, why I chose this topic today. And also Paul's spirit was urging me that it needed to be spoken to today. Divine timing and order are things that we can't foresee. But, you know, just off the top of my head, I can see at least some connections, because we have my father's side and my father himself, Phil, you know, being tied into Paul and Hendrix. Here's a question I hadn't thought of before. Was my father involved with Hendrix directly? So my father was just a couple years younger than Paul. And my father was one of my main handlers. Sorry, I'm just a little bit dissociating right now. Yeah, that's why I can't really make sense with my speech. I was just trying to reflect on everything my father had a hand in my life, all the abuse, and that it caused me to dissociate some. But I've spoken before already. You know, you saw a glimpse of that article linking him to the FBI, and I've spoken before about him running these pedophile rings under the guise of baseball and using it also as this structure for the Jewel MK Ultra programming. That I think is specifically in my video about exposing Deep Creek Lake. So I'll link that up in the corner here where you see that little eye. And so that Jewel programming, specifically the diamond level, which is what my father was really involved in, is about pimping you out to presidents. And so I have a specific memory of being involved with presidents. There's definitely a nausea that comes up with that. It's hard for me to acknowledge or accept the sexual abuse there. My father was also really involved in military operations and a lot of medical experimentation too, the secret space program. I'm pretty sure that he was involved with, there's a well-known secret space whistleblower who had sexually abused me, and I'm pretty sure that's him and my father were involved, and that's like how I ended up getting used in that part of the secret space program with that other whistleblower who's a fake whistleblower, because he's not who he says he is. He had sexually abused me. So my father, you know, was high up in the Illuminati deep state hierarchy. So it literally never even occurred to me until just now that he may have been directly involved with Hendrix himself. What's interesting is my father's still alive. So Paul, yeah, I mean, we have the positive influence of Paul in the spirit, and then we have the criminal, Phil, still alive and kicking and still perpetrating. Right, so we have some connections already. Time will tell what further connections will come of this. You know, it might be something that is revealed, you know, years later as like the whole world starts to be deprogrammed. So thanks for journeying down this rabbit hole with me. If you want to support this content, subscribe and click the little bell icon to get notifications of new content, and share this as well. You can also go over to the Facebook page and like and follow that to get different kinds of different formatting of content and evidence. And you can send contributions to my PayPal, which the link is down below in the description box. Also, you can send Amazon UK gift cards, and it is a long story, but the short story is, it's a long story of why these are really valuable to me. The short story is a lot of interference with me accessing my money and specific items that I need that are only available on Amazon. So Amazon UK gift cards are actually really valuable to me. So because I'm in the UK, it can't be a gift card purchased on the US website, but you can use your US accounts to log into to make that purchase from the UK website, and then it can be sent through through email or through a Facebook message. That would be particularly valuable right now. I have this tablet and the charger is about to break completely. It's on its last legs, and its last leg. It has 2 legs, we'll pretend, and it's on its last leg. So without the charger, I won't be able to do these videos, let alone do a lot of other things I need to sustain my livelihood. And then, of course, financial contribution of any kind is always very valuable. I might be able to one day replace these broken glasses. You want to see? These were broken whenever I was assaulted for intervening in child abuse back in November. Still haven't been able to replace them. So that's why they're crooked, and this lens falls out an awful lot. All right, so thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next video, and take good care of yourselves. Take good care of yourselves, everybody. Sorry, I'm a little fatigued at the end of a long video. All right.